The luncheon on Friday closed tomorrow. So the office is open afterward, not now. Make your reservation. And thank you for coming. It's so wonderful to see people I haven't seen in a while. And you should enjoy this morning. For those of you who are new to the University Club, are new to the history group, or never been here before, I'm Sherry Levy, co-chair with Dr. Ovid Vitas, and you are at the history group, and we make history. Now, the most important thing before we start, reach into your pockets and your pocketbooks and whatever, and please turn off anything that makes noise. After the meeting, you can make noise, but not your phones. Our next meeting will be Monday, April the 21st, and I'm really pleased because I'm very fond of this speaker. She comes all the way from New Orleans just to talk to us, and that's Dr. Ellen Hurwitz. And usually we have a full house and everyone gets involved with her when she speaks, so you won't want to miss it. I'm going to quote her. She will explore the burst of energy and creativity that spread across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia during the 12th century. This period witnessed crusades, the conquest of empires, and the establishment, and she used the word town churches, but we know them as these magnificent cathedrals, as well as the rise of universities. Now, what about the 12th century that caused this? Why suddenly out of the blue? Well, that's what Ellen's going to share with you. So, put it on your calendar, the 12th of April, and we will hear Ellen Hurwitz, and she's an award-winning professor, internationally recognized scholar, and her specialty is medieval Russia and Byzantine history. And she's so good, so please come. Now, history today. In 1712, a slave revolt occurred in New York City. Just after midnight, 9 slave owners were killed and 6 wounded by a group of 24 slaves. 21 were executed, and the remaining committed suicide. In 1805, Lewis and Clark left Fort Mandan to begin their journey to the Pacific Ocean. In 1827, English chemist John Walker sold the world's first friction matches in a tin case with a piece of sandpaper. In 1853, Queen Victoria asked John Snow to administer chloroform during her delivery of her 8th child, and that led to the acceptance of anesthesia. In 1891, Nebraska introduced the 8-hour work week. In 1895, polar explorer Fridtjof Nansen reached the closest to the North Pole. In 1922, Interior Secretary Albert B. Fall closed a secret deal to lease U.S. Navy petroleum reserves in Wyoming and California to his friends, oilman Harry St. Clair and Edward Doheny, in exchange for cash gifts, in which became known as the Teapot Dome scandal. In 1923, the first brain tumor operation was performed using local anesthesia in New York City. In 1933, the first Nazi anti-Jewish laws were issued barring Jews from legal and public service. In 1948, the World Health Organization was formed. In 1959, Oklahoma ended prohibition after 51 years. In 1969, the Supreme Court struck down laws prohibiting private possession of obscene material. 1985 was the first live telecast of the Easter Parade from New York City. And in 1988, Russia announced a withdrawal of its troops from Afghanistan. In 1994, the Vatican commemorated the Holocaust for the first time with an orchestra concert. In 2003, U.S. troops captured Baghdad, and that caused the fall of Saddam Hussein. In 2022, Ketanji Brown Jackson became the first black woman to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate to the Supreme Court. Birthdays today. American broker who financed the American Revolution, Haym Salomon. English poet, William Wordsworth. American cereal manufacturer, William Keith Kellogg. American journalist and gossip columnist, Walter Winchell. Politician, Jerry Brown. Actor, James Garner. American jazz singer, Billie Holiday. And now, it's my privilege to turn this mic over to co-chair, Dr. Ovid Vitas. I'm lost up here. Hello, goodbye.
I am not Dr. Vitas. My name is Stephen Pointer. I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Holocaust Center. I have the privilege on a regular basis of working with Gail as she engages with many of our groups and our student groups and some of our presentations throughout Central Florida. And I was so excited to hear that she was coming here. I believe I might have seen some of you when we brought Suzanne Schneider here to speak about her experiences. But one thing we're running out of at the center is voices from the Holocaust who are able to share their personal experiences. We all have many opportunities to hear from scholars and individuals who will talk about the events in a very in a detached way, but hearing someone who has an experience from a survivor level, 2G, which is a second generation, which Gail technically is, 3G or 4G, these are the voices that we count on to share the experiences of their families. Gail's story is really unique because she's going to share with you an aspect of the Holocaust that many people do not talk about, and that is the Holocaust by bullets, and which we're talking about Eastern Europe, and also being born in a displaced persons camp. Gail is just about qualified to be a Holocaust survivor, but since she's born after the war and her family primarily experienced the Holocaust prior to that, she is considered a 2G, and she regularly tells her story. She's actually shared her story with over 10,000 students last year in our Central Florida area through the Holocaust Center. And here's what's beautiful. Gail doesn't just share it as dead history. She shares it with purpose. She shares it, the story of the idea of being a mensch and speaking up for others, which is kind of what we're trying to do at the Holocaust Center even today with our Upstanders programs. And she regularly contributes at all of our schools. And I'm so proud to introduce Ms. Gail Sussman.
Wow, what an introduction, Little pressure. Anyways, thank you. It's an honor and privilege for me to be here. I want to thank Ovid and the University History Club for inviting me. Of course, I have to thank Stephen for coming and helping. He is a very busy man. He interacts with Orange County school system, Seminole County, private school, Christian schools. It warms my heart every time I come to the Holocaust Center and I see buses and buses of students and teachers and parents when they come in, and they not only hear me and other survivors speak, but there's exhibits and Holocaust educators. So I know when they leave the Holocaust Center that they have a perspective, not only knowledge, but a perspective, and maybe, just maybe, maybe we can touch their hearts and minds so they will always remember what happened. I must give a shout out to my beautiful friends, and I'm going to cry, to my beautiful friends at the Winter Park Gardens. Hello. I also want to shout out to my friends at LA Fitness. Yes, we do exercise, believe it or not. To Hans and Karen, and I think I saw George. George, hello, thank you. I also need to give, I'm full of thanks and gratitude because after you hear my story, it's amazing that I'm sitting here, standing here, and telling you this. And to my Hadassah new friends, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. When I was younger, I felt there was a wall of silence concerning the Holocaust. And I heard bits and pieces. You see, I was raised in a survivors community. And the first time I had a recollection of anything going on is when my parents took me to a memorial service called Yom HaShoah, which continues once a year here in the United States. It was a room maybe smaller than this. There was a rabbi with maybe 6 survivors, and there were 20 survivors in the audience with their children, and he started saying the Kaddish prayer, which is the Mormon's prayer, and there was this complete sadness, and they started to cry, and I looked at my mother and I said, why is everyone so sad? And she said, for the people who were killed in the war, nothing about our family. The second recollection I remember was, you see, I was raised in a survivors community. I remember this duplex, we lived upstairs, and my parents had a hard time financially, and they always rented. We never had a car. We took the city bus. So there was this woman by the name of Esther downstairs. So I used to run there. I was maybe 8 years old. And my Jewish name is Gittel. And she said, Gittel, come on in. And there was Esther. She couldn't have been more than 26 years old, but she had white hair and steel blue eyes. And she used to make cookies for me. That's the reason I came down there. But anyways, we used to sit together. She used to look outside that window. And then I saw some numbers on her arm, and I said, oh, Esther, I really want those numbers. How can I get those numbers? And she said to me, never do you ever want those numbers. And you see, I didn't hear anything about my history at all until I was 17 years old. So when my mother told me, I asked about Esther because she seemed so distant to me and sad all the time. And she said, you see, Esther was a survivor of Auschwitz, and then several doctors did experiments on her, and one of them was sterilization. So the third recollection for me, I wish I had 3 hours with you, but I don't. But the third recollection was this beautiful woman by the name of Cecilia. She was really my extended family. I had no one, but she was from close to where my father was born in Rovno. She had that same Russian accent that my dad had. And she was full of life, and she always had us over for Thanksgiving and Passover and Hanukkah, and that really became my extended family, and you'll understand what she did for me later on. And of course, the most important aha moment is that I met Ellie Wiesel. I had many careers in my life, which I'll tell you. And one of them was I was a therapist for Mount Sinai Medical, and I was doing support groups for survivors' children. And because I did that, I had an opportunity to meet with him. And he said this to me. He said, Gail, this is your legacy, like it or not. And one day, people will say that the Holocaust never happened. And anti-Semitism will be raging. And all those millions and millions of people who perished will be forgotten. And I'll never forget that, and that was always in the back of my mind. So about 2.5 years ago, when things turned upside down and I saw anti-Semitism again, I walked in to the Holocaust Center and I said, I have a story. So, are you ready to hear my story? Okay. Hope for a new beginning. I must thank my granddaughter for helping me put this together. She said, Nan, it's about time you became high-tech. She was right. So it's hope for a new beginning, and I talk about hope a lot. This presentation is dedicated to my grandparents and all the relatives who perished in the darkest time in European history, the Holocaust. I also want to honor my parents and all the survivors. They had the strength, courage, determination, and hope to start and make a better life for themselves and their families. They are the true heroes. They are the true heroes. Now remember, I see many, many, many students throughout the year. And if there's two things I want them to leave with is A, the Holocaust happened, and I want all of them to find their own mensch within themselves. And let me tell you how many people, I'm sure there are a lot of mensches in this room, how many people have ever heard the word mensch? I don't even have to tell you what it is. All right. But what I try to talk about, and I will integrate that concept, is in the Yiddish it has a deeper meaning of friendship and support and doing the right things with small acts of kindness. And I try to tell everyone that if we had more mensches during the Holocaust, it would have never happened. And if people really stood up for their friends and helped them out, it would have never happened. And that's what I talk about with the kids, about mensches. And we all have mensches inside. We have a lot of mensches in Winter Park Gardens, I can tell you that. LA Fitness too. Hadassah, yeah. And the University Club. Okay, come on. Here we go. Uh-oh, this is me and my mom and dad. My mother was 16 years old when the war broke out. Her name was Eula. My dad was maybe about 23 when it broke out, and I was 2.5 years old. As you can see, my mother loved bows in my hair. They couldn't get bigger and bigger all the time. Anyways. My mother was born in Nimenchin. Nimenchin was located in the Vilna province, and before the war, its population of Jews were 36%. That's 2.3 million. After the war, there were none left. The ethnic mix in this region was Russian, Polish, Lithuanian, and Jewish. The territory today is located in present-day Lithuania and Belarus. But let me tell you a little bit about Nimenchin. It was a very special place. It was a resort town. Think of the Catskills, but it was smaller. And it was a place where they had beautiful warm waters and lakes and pine trees, and everyone seemed to get along. I mean, they had, every Thursday they had farmers market, and they exchanged all goods, and they had a synagogue, and they had a church, and the kids played soccer together. But everybody knew about the big general store in Nimenchin, and that was my grandfather and his family who owned it. He had, are you ready? 16 siblings. 16 siblings, and they were all involved in that business, not only in the general store, but also restaurants, also gas stations. Everybody knew that family. So my grandfather also had 2 siblings, and they left 4 or 5 years before the war. And he also had a very, did you ever see the movie Defiant? Okay, my uncle should have been in Defiant. That's all I have to say. He was an amazing man, Uncle Mike. And he was 23 years old. He was a corporal in the Polish army. He was a sharpshooter. He was an electrician, and he used to race his bicycles. I mean, his motorcycle. Yes, yes. He won a lot of competitions. He was extremely close to his brother Chone, who was 18 months older. His brother Chone married into a very, very wealthy family from another town, and this was about 4 years before the war started. He married, and they had a 2-year-old son. But the most important visionary was my grandfather, Shlomo Pruzan, because he saw what that resort town was. In the summer, it hustled and bustled. So he started to build. Do you know the word dachas mean? You do? Great. That is little summer homes. And then eventually he built his own home, a big house, because you see all these 17 siblings, they all lived in a big house, and he built his own big house. So when he did that, his grandparents, my grandparents, great-grandparents said, okay, we're going to make a match. A shidduch, right? You know what shidduch means? A match. Not Match.com, but a shidduch. So he married my grandmother named Sarah, who was an excellent cook. She was beautiful, very conservative. She made apple strudel, which I know you all know. She also made challah, homemade challah. Every Friday she lit the Sabbath candles. She was very conservative. They had 3 daughters. This is their 2 daughters and 1 son. My mother, Eula, she was 16. Her Heike, her sister, 14. And a 5-year-old Mula. Let me tell you a little bit about my mother. She was a very interesting lady. She was very determined, goal-orientated. She loved to read. She loved authors. She read every Polish author, German author, Russian author. And when she was 16 years old, she finished high school, which was pretty good, don't you think, at 16. Then then her parents said, well, do you want to pick up a trade, or do you want to get married? She said, I'm not getting married. I don't want to shidduch. I want to work at that bank. And everyone laughed. Females don't work at that bank, but somehow or another she got a job at a bank, at a teller. And she was saving her money to go to the University of Warsaw. She wanted to teach literature and minor into business. This was my mother. Her sister, well, did you ever have a sister or brother who was totally, absolutely different than you? Like you wonder, how did this happen, right? This was Heike. She was beautiful, she was funny, she was in the moment, she was spontaneous, she wanted to be a gymnast. She raced the boys in the town square with bicycles. Her parents absolutely did not know what to do with her, but somehow or another, my mother was very close to her. So the Jewish holidays were coming, and my grandmother, Sarah, said, girls, I want you to go to Aunt Bella's farm because she had an apple orchard, and I need apples for my apple strudel and all other things. And so the girls were ready to go, my mother and Heike, and then she said to them, Eula, I want you to look after your sister in case she was always climbing those apple trees, so you'll take care of her. And my mother said, Mom, I'll always take care of her. So this was September 20th, 1941. As far as I'm concerned, the moral compass was broken in the United States. And I know that moral compass was totally shattered in Europe. All of these people, friends, they went to school together, turned their backs on my mother and their family. What happened? This ideology of hate, this ideology of killing, this ideology of to erase every Jew on earth and their culture. And this was fertile ground for the Holocaust of bullets, what kind of men? There were 1,500 men involved with this. There were 4 battalions. But what kind of men would do this? Well, they were middle class. They were doctors, accountants, business people, a few clergy. And what they had in common was to kill every Jew on earth. That's what they had in common. That was their ideology. And they were going to do it for the fatherland. So let me tell you, but I kept saying, wait a minute, 1,500 men, and they killed 2.3 million Jews. How did they do that? Collaborators. I am not saying all Lithuanians. I am not saying all Ukrainians. I am not saying all the Polish people. No, 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 no. But those people who believed that Hitler's ideology, and they agreed with it, so they joined the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squad. And let me tell you what their methodology was. First, they went to the Lithuanian police, and they said, who owns that big house, and who owns the general stores? And they told them. Second, they took 20 or 30 boys, and they said, we want you to start digging trenches and pits. People said, why are they doing that? Because we want to cover all our ammunition. They lied, and these sweet, innocent people believed them. And then they said, all right, everybody come to the town square. In Nemenchina, it was a synagogue. Meet everybody at the synagogue and bring all your valuables. Because they told them they might be going to Palestine, or they might be taking them to a ghetto, or they might find better work for them. So they did, and then came out the trucks with the machine guns and the rifles, and they shot everybody in the pits. So a few people, not all, climbed out, and then they tried to, save themselves. But you know what the Einsatzgruppen did? They said, we got to finish the job. So they came back and shot everybody who they thought was alive. That was the end of Nemenchine, at least the Jews in Nemenchine. So what about the apple orchard? Well, there was my mother, and then there was this farmer coming, and he was absolutely hysterical, and he said, it's all gone. And my mother said, what are you talking about? And he told her, and she was just frozen. She couldn't believe it. Heike heard that. She came down from the tree, and she said, no, I can't believe this. So she starts running towards Nemenchine. My mother takes her, and she says, no, we must save ourselves. I promised Mom I'll take care of you. How many of you would go back to Nemenchine? Raise your hand. To see for yourself. How many? Raise your hand. Yeah, I would. Yeah. How many of you would you have done what my mother did to save her sister and herself and run? Yeah. It was the hardest decision she ever had to make, because she couldn't believe it. But she had to take care of her sister. So there was a relative about 5 miles away. She said, maybe we can hide there. So she comes to the house, and the lady opens the door, and that was a distant relative, and there was Uncle Mike, Uncle Hane, my mother, and Heike, and that was all left. Everyone else was killed. Now, I told you that my Uncle Mike was he was a corporal in the Polish army. So he says, we can't sit here. We're going to be sitting ducks. So he said, I'm going back to the big house. Everyone says, you can't go back to the big house. He says, I have to get money. I have to get my electrical tools. I have to get things to barter with the farmers so we can find some hiding places. So that's what he did with his motorcycle. He goes to the big house. He was ready to open the door, and then there's a German soldier with a rifle in his neck. And he said, what are you doing here? And my Uncle Mike said, Hank, I know you. We played soccer together. And he said, Michael, you have to leave. They're looking for the Jew on the bike. He said, give me 5 minutes. So he went into the house. He got money, his electrical tools, and he left in the middle of the night. Would you say that German soldier was a mensch, yes or no? He did save my Uncle Mike. However, I'll give him a half a mensch because he believed in the German ideology. All right? Okay. So, what's the next thing to do? Hiding places. They found a hiding place for Heike. They spent a lot of money, I remember. They told me, for Heike's hiding place. There was a farmer. He had a 14-year-old son there, and Heike was there for 3.5 years on that farm. My mother went through various hiding places. There was she hid in a shoemaker's shop behind an oven all day. She couldn't leave. She just stood there, and then at night she went out. But that only lasted so long because my Uncle Mike said to her, the world of a Jew is getting smaller and smaller. We can't find any more hiding places. You have to go to the forest. She said, I'm 16 and a half years old. I can't be in the forest by myself. And she said, take me with you. She said, no, I want to go to the Vilna ghetto. He said, well, there's 300 to 500 people dying a week in the Vilna ghetto from starvation and typhus. He said, you have to survive here by yourself. She said, where are you going? I'm going to join the resistance with my Uncle Hannah. And they went to the underground resistance Polish, and eventually the Soviet partisans resistant movement. And he did some very dangerous things. Oh, yes, he did. You know what he did? He threw grenades in the railways so the Germans couldn't get their ammunition. He threw railways so cattle cars couldn't get into the concentration camps. He smuggled Jews out of the ghettos, gave them fake ideas, and used them as his assistant because he was an electrician. That's what he did. But my mother, she hid in chicken coops and barns, and one night she thought she was going to die because European winters are very, very cold. So she saw this house, knocked on the door. This lady opens the door, and my mother says, can you please help me? And this lady keeps looking at my mother. She was in pretty bad shape. And she said, I know you. You're Eula. You're the teller at the bank. And she said, yes. And she stayed there for many, many, many months in the barn. So it was Christmas Eve, and the family came. She said, Eula, it's Christmas Eve. Come and join us for dinner. So they took her into the house. They washed her up, put her dress on, put some rouge on because she was getting very sick. And Christmas Eve, there she was sitting at a table. There was a fireplace. She was eating with a family that she missed so much because she lost so much. And then Christmas Eve, another knock on the door, 3 German soldiers. Are you hiding any Jews here? And no, we wouldn't hide any Jews here. She said, come on. And so they came in, and they gave him some schnapps. You know what schnapps is, right? Yeah, okay. They were drinking. Then they kept this. The German soldier keeps looking at my mother, and he said, I want to talk to you. And my mother said to herself, this is it. This is the end. So he kept questioning her and all that, and then all of a sudden she talked about German authors and Polish authors, and he looked at her and he says, you're too smart to be Jewish. You can go. So she saved herself. And out in the cold she went again. Let me ask you, do you think that family, were they mensches? They risked their lives. They stepped up, didn't they? But they said they could only help her so much because they were very scared of what happened. So out in the cold, my mother goes. When the Allied troops found her, She was on death's door, and she was taken to a displaced persons camp in West Berlin. My Uncle Hunter and Uncle Mike also was taken to the displaced persons camp. My mother was in the hospital. When they visited my mother, she said, please go and find Heike. So they went to the big house first, and in that big house, there were strangers living in their big house, and all the silverware was gone, and all the paintings, and the carpets, and that beautiful mahogany table that everyone was sitting by, it was all gone. And then he went outside with his brother, and a neighbor said, Michael, what are you doing here? I thought Hitler killed all the Jews. And he said to his brother, we don't belong here anymore. Let's look for Heike. Well, they went to the farm. Nobody was there. And they asked the neighbors, what happened to Heike? Well, remember the 14-year-old? She was with a 14-year-old. He fell in love with her. The father was so enraged, and I think she was abused. The father was so enraged that he killed both of them. So when Uncle Mike told my mother this, my mother never mentioned her name again until I was 17 years old. So now we're going to move on to my dad. My daddy was good looking. He was good looking. My dad was born in Rovne, which is present-day Western Ukraine. He and his brother joined the Polish army. The defeat of the Polish army in 1939, then, this is really terrible. He was taken to a Siberian prisoner of war camp called the Gulag. He was there for 5.5 years, under the worst conditions. And what about his parents and his relatives and his brother? They too were killed by the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squad. And are you ready? They killed 15,000 Jews in one day. That's unbelievable, isn't it? But my poor dad, he was an actor. He acted in the Yiddish theater, the Russian theater. He was a sensitive soul. And he was very dedicated to his mother. I was named after her, Gittel. So when he heard about this, when he left the Gulag, there were 27,000 soldiers who marched into that Gulag, and 1,000 walked out. And my dad walked out with post-traumatic stress that haunted him most of his life and tuberculosis. He too was taken to a displaced persons camp. Well, I bet you know this song. I heard this song all my life. It was very haunting. Do you remember Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet? Did you ever hear the song? Okay, maybe you will. I'll just sing the first part. Here we go. Ready? Okay. Tell me, where can I go? There's no place I can see. Where to go, where to go? Every door is closed for me. Did you ever hear that? You didn't. Steve Lawrence sang that. Yep, this was a song that I heard in displaced persons camp in ghettos because they had nowhere to go. They were stateless, homeless. They had no deeds to their businesses, no deeds to the big house. And their only hope was Palestine. It was for my mother, for sure. Displaced persons camps. Displaced persons camps were supposed to be temporary, holding but over 260,000 refugees. My parents were in several camps for 7 long years. The displaced persons camps represented the continuation of the Jewish culture, hope, big word here, for a new beginning. What was it like? Well, displaced persons camps were scattered all over in Germany, Austria, and Italy. They were from 2,000 to about 4,000 people in each one. I was born in Schlachtensee. It was pretty bad, to tell you in the beginning. It was chaotic. There wasn't enough food, there wasn't enough shelter, they threw people together. Some people thought these were the collaborators that tried to kill them. They were sharing the same displaced person. It was a mess. So they started calling in the charities: Red Cross, Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, Jewish American Joint Committee, and they spent over $300 million to help. I know, today we talk about trillions and billions, but 300 million was a lot of money. What did they do with that? They built vocational schools. They brought in doctors, they brought in teachers, medical help, they built shelters. But when things started to sort of gel together, it was a spiritual revival. That's what I call it, a spiritual revival. All that repressed feeling that they had, now they said, maybe we could start the Jewish culture here. Maybe we have synagogues. Rabbis found congregants. They started to have sports. They had 70 newspapers in Yiddish. They had different sporting events. They had an orchestra. The Jewish culture started again. Oh, here I am. Huh. I was so happy to be, my story was in a book. How about that? See, the Holocaust keeps knocking on my door all the time. Just like Elie Wiesel, you know? Then somebody wanted to write a chapter about me in a book. So, a baby girl, a German displaced person camp, and a hope for a new beginning. And you know what the hope was? Children. Between 1945 and 1947, there was a baby boom. But when I saw this proposal, it was very sad, but it's the truth. And I want to read this to you. Post-war marriages weren't always based on love. Sometimes they were based on fear, loneliness, and need for companionship. So the proposal is, I am alone, I have no one, I lost everything. You are alone, you have no one, you lost everything. Let us be alone together. And sometimes they got hooked up together in 4 weeks. They were so lonely. So how did my parents meet? Oh yeah, they met at a dance. My dad was a really good dancer. Tango. He was really good. And my mother lived in one room with 2 other girls, and they became her best friend. And they went to the dance, and then all those romantic novels my mother read, there he is. And he was dancing with some beautiful women, and he came up to her, and 3-4 months later, they got married. Guess what her gown was made out of? What? Smart man. Silk parachutes. You're right. You're right. But you know, my mother never had breaks. She didn't. When I was born, she almost died. My father was beside himself. Here he is with a baby. He's an actor. He has no skills. So guess what he did? He got involved in the black market. He sold nylons, gold, chocolates, anything he could find, cigarettes, to the Allied troops. So we moved out of the barracks into a small apartment. And he hired a German nanny. And that's why I was raised with fluent German. That's why I speak fluent, not now, but I did. Because my mother was so sick for 2.5 years. So the German nanny, one day, took me to the Autobahn, you know, the big train. And she was so excited, she came home, and she said to my mother, you know, Everyone comes up, everyone's looking at your cute little girl, and nobody would ever know she's Jewish because everybody thinks she's German. So that was an eye-opener for my mother. There was raging anti-Semitism in Germany, raising anti-Semitism in Poland, and where are they going to go? And my mother wanted to go to Israel. My dad wanted to go to the United States because he didn't want to fight anymore. He was suffering from post-traumatic stress. So this is the original document that he's applied to go to the United States. So they agreed, whatever comes first, right? Either United States or Palestine. Most of the refugees went to the United States, Palestine, Australia. My Uncle Mike and my Uncle Honey went to Canada. One day we got a knock on the door. A social worker comes in. We found you a sponsor. Oh yeah? Where? United States. Huh, where? New Orleans. Where's New Orleans? Louisiana. Oh, who do you think? She's asked that too. The sponsor, where do you think the sponsor came from? Think back in the story. Have any idea? That's right, the siblings. The two siblings that went to the United States. And I remember going across a big ocean liner. It wasn't Royal Caribbean, that's for sure. And then we got on this big train, and all the refugees were on the train. And my mother was so excited. And there was a man jumping up and down, up and down, up and down, with baskets and baskets full of fruit and stuffed animals and candy. He was so happy to see us. And this man, who was young when he came to the United States, Stephen, are you wearing those shoes? Florsheim shoes. Good for you. This man was the CEO of Florsheim Shoes. You've heard about it, right? Stephen always wears that. And so he was so happy, he said to my mom, we're going to find my dad a job. He was working in a factory. And this was in the middle of July. Do you know how hot it is in New Orleans? My mother said, what kind of weather is this? Who can live in this? And she says, the spicy food. The spicy food, it just, you know, this is not the European culture she wanted. So somehow or another, they found a survivors community in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that's where I was raised. Green Bay Packers, right? All right, hold on. I'm almost done, I'm gonna go quick. This is so interesting, it warms my heart. Oh God, time. I didn't speak English, right? German and Yiddish, right? That's it. My mother was very concerned. How am I going to, my parents went to night school to learn English, and then she put me in a special program, assimilation program for kids in who were born in concentration camps and displaced persons camp. These little kids, including me, from Austria, Germany, and Greece, and this is Dorothea Pinko. And she was my first teacher, and this was her first year in teaching. She'll never forget these kids, never forget these kids. So here we are, 15 years ago. She gives me a call, Gito. Haven't heard, no one has to call me Gito. She followed all these kids. She wanted to know how I was doing. These little kids, from nothing and nowhere, from pain and loss. One became a professor at MIT, accountants, doctors, engineers. Do you want to hear my degrees? Sure, I'll tell you what I did. I have a degree in secondary education, a master's degree in educational psychology. I was a certified mental health counselor for the state of Florida. I worked with Tufts University in the health and wellness program for 4 years. And then I became a consultant to businesses, and I had my own. Not bad for a little girl who couldn't speak English and came from poverty. And I did come from poverty. Here we go. We're almost done. I just wanted to tell you I was bullied in 10th grade because my name was Gito. My mother was so overwhelmed, so they changed my name to Gail, G-A-L-E. Why G-A-L-E? Because she watched My Little Margie on TV. So she, right? You remember it, right? Yeah. Sure, Gail Storm, there you go. G-A-L-E, yeah. I kept that because that was such a fond memory for me, right? But remember, we lived in a bad school district. So she asked her friend Celia, remember Celia? Celia and her husband moved on up. They moved into a better area, a better school district. So she said, I can help Gito. She could use my address. And so from middle school all the way through senior year in high school, I used her address. I used to get up at 6 in the morning and pray that I made that 9 o'clock bill. I took 2 city buses. Would you say she's a mensch? She stepped up, didn't she? Absolutely, absolutely. Well, my parents wanted to get into the grocery store business. Why? Well, why not? My mother helped in the grocery store. The first grocery store, they went bankrupt. The second grocery store, they did better. They became part of the community. The community loved them. She got so busy that eventually he hired Louis, who was a survivor from, I'm very protective of survivors, by the way, of the concentration camps. And he too had some numbers. And he was helping my dad, and I get a phone call at home from the police that something terrible happened at the grocery store. I go in there with my mother, and my dad was white as a sheet. He didn't even speak. His friend Louis was shot to death from gang members, and my mother said, and my dad said, we're shutting it down. No more hate, no more violence, I'm done. And my father had a heart attack after that, post-traumatic stress, came back, and they lived about 2 blocks away from a synagogue, and I was extremely worried about him. And I said, Dad, let's just go to the synagogue. He said, I'm not a man of faith. So I took him once, I took him twice. And then eventually he became part of the community. And when he died at 80 years old, I know he died in peace. From all that he's went through, but I knew he died in peace. And I took care of my mother, and she was 74 years old when she died. So, due to the survival courage and the intelligence of my parents, I was born. I, like other survivors' children, became their hope for a new beginning. I have flourished. I have children and grandchildren, and this marks a triumph over Hitler's Holocaust. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gail. I think we all need a moment to catch our breath. And we do thank you, Gail, for sharing.
Well, thank you. Any questions?
We have questions from the audience.
Yes.
How was it that you attended school, that picture with your classmates, most of whom were African American? How did that happen?
Well, because it's the school district, that's where we lived in. And I was bullied there, to the point that some kids were making fun of me, and they threw a chair at me, and my mother couldn't because of her background, she just couldn't take it anymore, that's why. But we were in that school district. They couldn't afford private schools. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Questions here.
How did you finish up in West Germany, in West Berlin? So since you were in the East, and
how did they? Well, they had a concentration camp in West Berlin, in Schlachtensee, and that's where they took some of the survivors. Yes, but they had various displaced persons camp in Germany. Yeah.
Were you given your parents given the choice to stay there, or can you?
They did. Some people went to different camps. It was interesting because I remember there was some people from the Lodge ghettos, and there were many people from the Lodz ghetto, and they stayed together in that displaced persons camp with friends, yes. Any more?
Yeah, Martha.
When were the first displaced persons camps set up and by whom?
Okay. They were set up, let's say, in about what would you say, Steve, 1950? No, 1947? About 1947, and guess what? They were there till 1954. 1954, yeah.
Have a good-
Have you ever visited one of the concentration camps like Auschwitz or Dachau?
No, I didn't want to, but I did go to Germany,
Okay.
and I did go to Israel. I promised my mother could never afford to go to Israel. I promised her I'd go.
I did visit Dachau many years ago, and it was an overwhelming feeling to just walk through there
Yeah.
and to see how one person was able to do so much damage to humanity.
It was human. It was in man's inhumanity to
Yes,
man.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I do. Thank you for sharing your story, by the way.
Thank you. It was my
Um,
honor and privilege. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Were any personal items that were stolen by the Germans, the Nazis, ever recovered back
No.
to your family or anybody
Nothing.
in your family?
Nothing.
Okay.
And the Polish government took over the big houses. Yeah. I want to tell you, there was a picture of my uncle Hune there with, remember he lost his wife and his baby. So in the displaced persons camp, he met Judith, and they had 3 children. So he was a very quiet man. He never talked about the Holocaust, and his children never talked about the Holocaust. Because someone asked me to make a movie about my life, and I had to include Uncle Mike, and they said no. And I respect that. There are a lot of people who still can't talk about it, and I respect that, yeah.
Gail,
Yes.
who ran the camp that you were at?
That's interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, it was the Allied troops that got together. It was, different rehabilitation people were there. There were 2, I forgot to tell you. Thank you for bringing that up. There were 2 political groups, the Zionists and the Socialists. And they had quite a bit of influence on the refugees, especially the Zionists. And they tried to recruit quite a few people, and because they had agricultural schools there, because they wanted them to be trained to go to the kibbutz. But they did have their own political groups, by the way, quite a few, yeah. So it was sort of, they did have, because, Germany was divided in so many different ways. They did have curfews in the beginning. They did have curfews. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing. Someone mentioned it was one man. No, there's a book, Hitler's Willing Accomplices. And I think, sometimes we have bad leaders, but if they don't have the followers, they can't do as much damage.
Anything else? Gail, thank you.
I think there's a
There are
question.
questions over there.
Yeah.
Right, hang on.
Hang on.
Who was it?
You go into the schools, or do the schools come to you?
We do both.
Okay. My basic question is, what type of reaction and/or questions do you get from students?
Many of them are not aware of the Holocaust of bullets. Many of them don't know anything about displaced persons camp. I just did a group with advanced European history, and they knew quite a bit, but they didn't know very much about the displaced persons camp. We do, before they come into the Holocaust Center, they fill out a survey to see how much knowledge they have about the Holocaust. by the time they're done, I'm sure they know. They do have some knowledge, yes.
That's it.
I always assumed that the Jewish people did not want to stay in Europe, and